Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences patented technology protects any application against any attack with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Signal Sciences. In a fast-paced tech environment, the potential attack surface increases with each release and new app created. Detectify automates cutting-edge knowledge from trusted ethical hackers into the development pipeline for reliable application security. Go beyond the OWASP Top 10. Check your web apps for over 2,000 known vulnerabilities actively exploited in the wild, monitor subdomains for potential takeovers, and remediate security issues in staging and production. Learn more with a free trial at securityweekly.com/Detectify. Go hack yourself. By connecting to your code repository, Accurix generates a topology across your full stack to reveal risks so that you can harden your architecture. It also scans code for violations against compliance and security standards to enforce best practices. In addition, Accurix develops threat models using vulnerability feeds, IAM privileges, and other data to predict potential breach paths. Learn how easy it is to get started with Accurix at securityweekly.com/Accurix.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. I'm your host, Mike Shima, joined by Matt Alderman and John Kinsella. Security Weekly, in partnership with Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. This one-day virtual event wraps up with the 15th anniversary edition of Paul's Security Weekly live on YouTube. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to view the agenda and register for free. In our webcast on November 5th, we'll show you how to build proper metrics and KPIs. On November 12th, learn why you should stop trying to discover and classify data. Then, in our November 19th technical training, learn how to thwart attackers using deception. Visit securityweekly.com/webcasts to see what we have coming up, or visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to view our previously recorded webcasts. And before we get into news of this week, I got some chat feedback from about our security theater presentation that we kind of touched on a little bit last episode. And JLK in the chat thought we should talk about it some more. So I thought that was great to hear from a listener. And John, maybe you could tell us what you thought about that particular presentation.
That guy, man. Yeah. So it's I like to think that I'm always living, eating, breathing AppSec and hopefully some other things too. But I didn't get around to watching this presentation until after the show last week. And, it rang enough bells with me that I felt bad of just pointing out what company Kelly worked with instead of actually having a decent conversation about it. So I said, hey, let's bring this back. So it's an interesting talk. And I think, I almost asked our last guest, but I didn't want to put him on the spot. So I should have preloaded it before we went on air. But I think there's a conversation here worth having about this. I think she brings up a lot of interesting points. I think some of it is it can be taken a little negative. So what I'm trying to do personally is take a step back, take a deep breath and go, okay, take the negative feedback, and then ask the question of, does this actually relate to me and the AppSec projects which I've run and been a part of? Or, where can I improve, or where is this just something maybe for other people? Or so that's sort of where my head is run up. I think it's worth more than the 20-second blow off. So curious to hear if Mike or Matt, if you guys have any deeper thoughts in, or I can pick out a few key thoughts from some of her slides and we can go from there.
Yeah, well, there's some great lines in here, and I think to your point, they may seem negative, but I think we can turn them into a very productive conversation. Look, our industry is full of marketing FUD. It is, just in general, right? And so you hear the term shift left a lot. And she has a great line in here. Shift left is often more shift friction earlier than build in security by design. It's a very interesting take. Now, developers don't want that friction earlier, but if I can get it out of the way earlier in the process, It makes me a little more efficient on the back end of the process instead of piling all this up at the end. It's just a very interesting take on the concept of shift left. I thought it was a really interesting one. Her second one, which is right after that, is DevSecOps. I'm not a regular security theater. I'm a cool security theater. Well, of course, because this term DevSecOps has been debated around and batted around for a while, is can sec really sit in the middle of dev and ops or not, right? And so I do like some of the things she states in here as ways for us to think about it outside of its marketing terminology and how other people use it to really understand, is it worthwhile to shift left? Is DevSecOps something we really can do, or are we just blowing smoke across over to the security team? I thought those two lines were very interesting.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead, Mike, if you have something.
Now, I was going to say the things that stood out to me were really that aspect that Matt was touching on, and that idea of, are we shifting left, which really just means we're shifting the burden of security off of the security team more onto developers. Or are we actually, that's the negative aspect. That's the thing that we should be avoiding. That's sort of that theater aspect in the sense of, well, here's an activity that we should be doing because we've always been doing it, or someone has been doing it. And rather than the security team do it, we're just going to scale up and make the developers do it. But let's pause for a second and say, why should we be doing this particular process? Or why should we be switching this burden onto developers and instead do that aspect of, and I think you even mentioned this a little bit in the last segment there, John, what about the security involved with the design discussions? Because I think very strongly that security can just be an emergent process of well-designed DevOps approach or just an SRE approach. And we don't need to try and sneak that sec suffix or sec into there anywhere in order to just say, yes, we're part of the team. We can actually be part of the team by making life easier for developers to find vulnerability. So that's the part I really wanted to get up on my stage and talk about. So back over to you, John.
Hot potato catch. So yeah, and I think if I sort of try to put a few thoughts on what you guys are saying there, to me, a word is a word. And, some folks out there know I have a tendency to swear like a sailor sometimes, if not worse. But a word is a word. A word adds context and color and meaning around what you're doing. So, it's like I hope I don't make people cringe when I say this, but it's like when we have people saying containers have been around since the 1970s. No shit. But how containers are being used today is a little bit different than how they've been used over the last 20, 30 years, right? So, and then something like this, when I was doing talks, and hopefully again I'll do talks on stages, we lighten up and get our health back in normal. But one of my things that I like to say is, you don't go to a store and buy DevOps off a shelf, right? It's a word, and same with DevSecOps. There's a lot of people out there that really makes them cringe. I use the phrase DevSecOps because it's talking, at least to me, about a frame of mind, right? Can I mix security in with the developer process and actually have those things come closer together? And that's what I mean when I say shift left. Can we capture those issues earlier in the stream? So I think, and I'm not saying she's off base. I know there's a lot of folks out there, and there's a line in here she uses, which I saw at Layered Insight all the time, which is, if your company is putting a firewall on a container, that's security theater. Completely agree with her. But I think it's not so much active actors. I think it's people who are, in many cases, stumbling and just trying to figure out, how do we make this thing secure? Because they're trying to keep up what's going on out there. So I think the talk is really good from a point of view of, like I said, take a step back and think: does this describe your organization? Does this describe what you're doing? Or are you doing things with a little more presence and purpose? And then she goes a little further down later about security chaos engineering. I was talking about this with someone last week, and I can't remember who, but their comment was, chaos engineering, the only group that I would trust on the planet doing chaos engineering is Netflix. So, and I think she's using the phrase to be a little more about, hey, let's learn and let's understand and let's have a feedback loop going on, right? Don't just do things because you can. If you can improve upon something and make it better, let's do that. So I think that aspect of things is cool. And again, it's how you take the words and what you think of it. But I think it's definitely worth people to at least read the deck and think about it.
I think it's a great deck for security folks to really understand the movement that is here and how they adapt to the movement and not play their traditional, well, I'm the security team, I'm the security team of no, and you can't do this, blah, 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 right? I mean, this is great for security teams to really understand what's actually happening on the other side and really, I hope, change the way they approach application security in this new world. Forget about the terms. It's about communication. It's about being adaptable. It's allowing you to figure out how to get the results without all the friction and all the complication that we've had in the past. So I think it's really good for security teams to like just hear this and see this, because I think it will put them in a better position.
Yeah, why are we doing this, right? Thinking about, again, our last guest, he was talking at the end there about Signal Sciences doesn't want a WAF to be thought of as something that the network team runs. Completely agree. At a previous organization, if we meant to make a change to the WAF, that would take days. And that completely is like that organization was talking about, we're DevSecOps or we're DevOps or, whatever, pick the phrase. But you go from that to like, oh, we need to have this multiple process to actually. So I understand, and some of this is real world and actually happens out there. And I think that's, as I said, something for people to think about. And, why are you doing things?
Why are you doing things? And I think that's a great thing, too, that I also try to pull in when we talk about other articles is sort of figure out what is a fundamental, what's something we can learn from them. Because one of the aspects, too, is you mentioned if you're dropping a firewall on a container, or if you're dropping a lot of security tooling on a container, but then you're executing with root privileges, you're kind of defeating the purpose of that's sort of the idea of security theater in the sense of, are we addressing the most prominent threat in our threat model? Are we doing something just out of inertia because we think it's a good process to have and we think that we should always have a dual control and two people to approve something? But are we actually just approving for the sake of a firewall change because we need to approve firewall changes, but we're still letting everything through 443 and all the injection attacks, RCEs and path traversals, my favorite, can still happen through there. So it's one of those things that hopefully when we do talk about other articles, talk about vulnerabilities, we try to highlight what's good about, or what should a good reaction be, or how can we turn that into, call it a pre-mortem exercise or a threat modeling. And in that vein, sort of try to segue that into another thing we talked about last week, which was industrial IoT. And in this case, there was a news article about what are they? Industrial systems for irrigation that were passwordless by default. And that's kind of definitely a snooze almost, and just kind of roll your eyes like passwordless yet again on IoT. But one of my questions there would be, who deployed this and why didn't they have a runbook that covered how to change and do password rotation, let alone from that initial install? So that's where I think that there is, that's not necessarily security theater, but there is still an important burden, important responsibility for this, both on the manufacturer in this case, of a pretty consequential problem for irrigation systems, as well as who should have been paying attention to say, oh, wait, we should have a new password on here.
I just want to get to the next article. Yeah, I'm not going there. I just this Flash article is like, oh my gosh, finally, hallelujah.
I was trying to find really quickly who the manufacturer is to see if they do. I want to see if my point from last week about the Siemens installer is the same thing, and if there's someone actually installing it or if it's a company. But the point still stands, right? It shouldn't have default passwords. We know how to do these things nowadays. It'll probably take a few years for that to trickle out to some of the, I'll say, legacy companies. But anyways, everyone's excited about the next article, so I'll shut up.
Everyone's excited. Yes, I do have to say, because I can't give up my Halloween theme, and so for those of you out there thinking of industrial as music for your IoT speakers, every day is Halloween. And otherwise, if you're placing industrial systems on your IoT, please do something better with passwords. But that also means we can do something better about Flash now. And now there's a particularly important aspect to this about Flash being dead that possibly, also speaking of horror movies, it may in fact stay dead. But Matt, you sounded pretty excited to get onto this. So what was your take here?
Well, the first thing that comes into my mind is ding dong, the witch is dead, right? I mean, look at how many issues we've had with Adobe and Flash over the years, the vulnerabilities, the 0 days, all this stuff. And to see it coming to end of life, and then Microsoft says, yeah, I'm going to remove it and you can't undo it, is like, yes, finally.
Now we just have to get people to get people to apply the Windows patches.
Right.
Absolutely, and that's the part. If you're going to kill Flash, this is absolutely the right way to do it, because their guidance says after you install this update, you basically have to roll back or reinstall from a fresh instance without this update to use Flash ever again. So to me, that just sounds like, to John's point, we have to get people to install one more patch, please. But once they do, that pretty much guarantees Flash is dead. So that to me sounds like a great way to really enforce the end of the decomposition end of the software life cycle, which might also be decommission, but decomposition sounds better.
Right. And I think the timing of this announcement is about right. It means you've got about 65 days to apply the patch, which is probably the normal patching cycle for most organizations.
I mean, it'd be interesting as a thought experiment. Does the legal team at Adobe do anything about this? Did they? I don't remember if they yelled at Apple when Apple said we're getting rid of this Flash thing. But I mean, to forcibly remove another company's product from your operating system, and I know it's being shut down, so it's like I said, it's more of a thought experiment at this point. But that's in a way, it's sort of an aggressive move.
We have seen that, and there were even talking about, I can't remember, my sense of time is gone, but even if you recall the Zoom installer, Apple actually blocked that the old version of the Zoom installer, the one that installed a local a local host, web server essentially. So there is some precedent for that, and it is an interesting thought experiment to go through in the sense of, is this software introducing something that is a risk and a threat to the safety, privacy of people's data on their system? In this case, Flash, pretty demonstrably yes, and of course, as you mentioned, hopefully I think the Adobe legal team is sitting back and drinking some champagne now that they don't have to write up so many breach notices or critical updates about Flash. So hopefully that's a good thing. But speaking of breach notices, go ahead.
Yeah, 1 second. Microsoft was doing this experiment themselves with the whole IE removal and forcing you to Edge. That was last week or the week before. So again, it's interesting when it's somebody else's product, but in Microsoft's case, they're doing it to their own product. They're like killing IE to move to Edge, say, look, we're not supporting it anymore, which also has a very interesting potential ramification for a lot of organizations that have still hung on to IE browsers. But what an announcement for Microsoft to make a very similar claim. Like, after this date, you can't use IE anymore.
That's a great point. And we've also seen even within the ecosystem, Google was one of the first movers to come out and say, we don't think these SHA-1 certificates are any good more for our TLS connection. So we're going to start to deprecate it. And then Firefox got on, Apple and Microsoft got on the bandwagon as well. And they did actually have to extend when officially those SHA-1 certs were going to die. But that was a movement that, a browser vendor started to impact the whole ecosystem. And so it is interesting to see how some pretty meaningful movement are being made here, and not without a little bit of pain or a little bit of objection either, I have to say. But I think now we can also talk about a breach. In this case, it was a Home Depot breach, and I can't remember what the amount of records were. But the aspect that stood out to me here was this was not a breach that was due to a external compromise, external actor. And even Alfred last segment mentioned the now notorious, infamous, if you will, Capital One breach, SSF into a S3 bucket. So external attacker, perhaps with some insider knowledge, but still a compromise. Nor was this was a cloud misconfiguration in the sense of a Elasticsearch or an S3 bucket being open. This was a kind of hand wavy as it was described as a system error. But basically, personal information being emailed, receipts, order information to the wrong people, and that is still a breach, for all intents and purposes, that the code itself was induced. So one of those things to keep in mind when you're having, as a security team, threat modeling exercises or discussions with developers about what are we building and what could go wrong. What could go wrong could in fact lead to emails going to the wrong people, leading to possibly a breach that requires notification.
Yeah, it looked like at least 900. And the other just little trick out of this one is also, if you're going to send to a bunch of people, put them on the BCC line so they can't see the other person's email address. I'm just saying.
Between BCC and don't reply all, those are the that, and we're going to throw that on our top 10 list of don't run as root and look out for // So we're building our Application Security Weekly top 10. We'll have it finished by the end of the year. But I also wanted to shift. So we have been talking a lot about we started off talking about security theater and ways of asking ourselves as a security industry, are we doing the right things? Are we the baddies, so to speak? But rather than just focus on vulnerabilities, it's also want to focus on tools and how can we build better architectures. Here is an example, a new discussion or a new release from AWS and Nitro instances. And John, I know this came across your radar. Want to talk us through this?
Yeah, this is a fun one. And as you said, so I think the three big cloud providers now all have some offering in trusted compute. I think Microsoft got theirs out. Do they? I presume they do by now. So the question then comes what do you do? How do you do with this? And how do you make these things secure and trustable, right? So with Amazon's I'm butchering this intro. With Amazon's Nitro offering, what they're doing here is they've come out with a, the headline that captured me, I think, was from the Register, basically saying you've got a VM with no persistent disk, with no public internet access, and you can't connect into it. What the hell do you do with this? My paraphrase. But really, it's what they're doing is they're providing an air-gapped instance, which I think is sort of interesting. And it must have taken a pretty good amount of actually engineering on their part to do this. So the way this works with their child's Nitro instances, so it's actually you create it from an existing Nitro instance. So basically, here's your run plane. You create an instance, an EC2 Nitro instance at Amazon. You hop in there with your Nitro tool set. You say, hey, I want to take this image, which could be either a Docker image or a V image or whatever else. I want to turn that into a Nitro child. From that point forward, it's going to sign the boot image, sign the processes in there, and sign one other thing I forget. There's a few things it signs for attestation. It fires it up. The only way you can connect with that child interest is over child. Speaking today again, Mondays. The only way you can connect into that child instance is over a socket, a Unix socket. So that sort of limits you and is going to require you to think about a different way of how to actually connect this and do things with it. But the idea is if you actually need something to be securely computed, to use that phrase, this is Amazon's sort of choice in how to do it. So it's going to take a little more work. They've got some sample example code sets out there on how to play with and how to set it up. But it's going to be interesting to see what people actually do with this, right? So it's you want isolation, there you go. If you want full isolation, now you go and you rent a full server from Amazon, so you make sure there's no other customers on the same box with you, and then you start doing this. That sounds pretty secure. With the attestation, what they've done is you're able to, as that instance boots, it can go out to the KMS, their key management server, and ask for the keys to decrypt whatever it's doing, either data or processes or what have you. So it will, at that point, attest the signs with the signatures which it used from during the compute before. So if those match up, you can say, okay, I've got a child instance, my signatures match. Let's go ahead and grab that data over that pipe, unencrypted with the key, do the crunchy, and then send it back. And so that's going to be their solution. It took a while for me to explain that because it's not a super simple thing, but that's how they're doing this. So I'm curious to see how people use it and how popular it becomes.
Yeah, and I think it's a great explanation to describe that this is if you really need and want that trusted boot process, so that that image and that application that you start up, it hasn't been tampered with, so then you can actually then go and do have it secure computed, to use our phrase of the day, on your data. That is a very nice that's a very nice guarantee. And one of the things here too is this is also a long time coming. So as I mentioned too, we talked about like browser isolation. It took Firefox around 2 years, I think, from start to finish to actually get that deployed. Amazon announced, Nitro and this capability back in 2017, and they were playing around with basically how do we abstract the device models so that we can actually have these, encapsulated images and have them cryptographically signed, etc. But they realized doing it in software only is high latency, so low performance. And now they've switched to doing a lot of this within ASICs. And now those ASICs have produced the high performance and low latency capability. So not only can we get a trusted boot, but we can get a trusted boot that's going to do this secure computed data operations in a way that's actually not going to be too expensive, either in time or money. So I think that's a really interesting thing too, to watch that journey and see how a lot of these abstractions now are going into chips. And maybe we'll also see changes there with a lot of like Apple moving to a lot of ARM and I think Microsoft doing a lot of things with ARM as well, and even just building up custom ASICs for their cloud environments.
Yeah, the economics of this have really shifted the game when you think about the scale these guys are working on and their ability to. First, it was create their, I think Google first started doing, just use motherboards without a case for cooling processes and things like that. Just, get rid of stuff we don't need. And now these guys are creating their own chips, their own ASICs. It's sort of incredible what some of these large cloud providers are able to do now. So hopefully we'll benefit from that from a security point of view.
Hopefully we shall.
So. Let's hope.
Because we still need to benefit from that, because there's still going to be, as we were reminded in the last segment, there's still a lot of application layer, a lot of layer 7 vulnerabilities that secure computing, or confidential computing, I should say, isn't going to protect us from. So you can still have a very well trusted boot sequence and an untampered application that still has an injection problem, or in this case, perhaps an insecure way that it handles link previews. And I highlighted this particular blog post. It's a really nice overview of different considerations, different approaches to handling link previews, whether you're in a chat app, a messaging app like Signal or iMessage, or even something like Slack, or our very favorite Discord that hopefully everyone is active on right now during our live stream. But the point here is that I think this type of concern can be generalized to, are you an application handling user-generated content, and how are you rendering that? Are you rendering links on your own services or on the end user's device? Because there's a lot of interesting privacy and security trade-offs between exposing not only IP address or perhaps other cookies even associated with those users, to as well as, is this user-generated content even safe? Is it an image, for example, notoriously going after some type of flaw, an unpatched flaw in an image decoder?
Yeah, I'm looking at these different tests because, we use a couple of these, right? Discord will download up to 15 meg of any kind of file, right? Then you've got Hangouts, which we don't really use. Slack is up to 50 meg of any file. Zoom 30 meg. So yeah, it's interesting from a security perspective of how far this stuff can get before you realize, oops.
I think for many years we've talked about phishing attacks, and the RSA has tons of vendors doing the anti-phishing stuff. I think we're still on the edge what we're going to see with the chat stuff. As these type of programs become more common for larger enterprises, we've talked at least once previously this year about different attacks you can do over GIFs and stuff like that are being rendered. So I think it's from 2 points of view. The 4 approaches they have here, 0, 1, 2, and 3, are interesting. I think it's worth thinking about, and they've got a chart further down this page. It's a long post, but they've got a chart here that sort of lays out the different chat programs and how they do this. So you can sort of quickly look and see which one's yours and how things are going to, how your security is looking like right now. But I think going forward, we're going to see more of this. I get the funny feeling we're if these guys don't really hop on top of this, the bigger names, we're going to be talking more about this in the future.
We will, and it's great. Yeah, we have mentioned a lot of different image-based attacks, anything from just buffer overruns to denial of service. An exploding decompression algorithm, for example. And what was really interesting here too is also there's that privacy angle, and this happens to also pull in interesting design discussions I'll say the shift left in the sense of our architecture discussions when we're talking about end-to-end encryption. Because if you're going to say we're going to have strong end-to-end encryption, then by that very nature, you potentially are saying you actually need to now generate that link preview on the end client because you don't want to expose or leak any information about this communication, or do you just opt in, have the user be able to opt into that particular decision, sort of like what Signal's design does? So there's really interesting trade-offs here just that are also impacted by what are the features or guarantees you're trying to make within your application beyond that initial security guarantee that you're not going to be exploited by an RCE in a particular decoder algorithm. So I think fun conversations can come out of that. Additionally, I think some fun conversations that we wrap up here. I threw in another link just since we haven't had a good architectural or educational, article in a while. Just a link with a lot titled "Getting Started in macOS Security" that pulls in a lot of different training resources, blog posts, a lot of different people that are working in the macOS environment, from the iOS to now iPadOS, tvOS, and of course on our laptops and desktops, the macOS itself. So hopefully some good reading there, some interesting reading for those of you who want to dive into those particular angles of security. And I think too, there's one final article that I didn't throw into show notes yet, but I'll have to add that I think will let you take us out on. John, what was your one from this morning?
Yeah, one last final one. Sorry, they're trying to drag us off stage here. So this was from the Register also. Always fond of reading that, but briefly, someone figured out that you're able to do cross-site scripting through registering a company name in the UK business database. So apparently, it's actually legislated the characters which can and cannot be included in those company names. So they have a bit of a struggle to figure out how do they actually protect this, because they can't just easily filter out some of those characters. So now they're going to have to put up with a bunch of people having a little bit too much fun with cross-site scripting in company names for a while.
Exactly. And for all of you also playing with, for example, license plate readers who've been putting SQL injection, if you have been trying your cross-site scripting on your license plate reader as well, for those of you who don't live in UK to take advantage of this for real estate, maybe that's another venue to go after. But on that note, thank you for the entertainment about XSS. It's sort of the Bitcoin of vulnerabilities, I suppose. I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank Matt and John once again for joining me. And we'll thank everyone for joining us, which I think I've said twice, but it's November. I just wanted to make sure we started off on a good note. Well, thank you again. We'll see you next week on Application Security Weekly.